three Muslim men in Wales, kidnapping a Jewish man, abusing him, threatening him, trying to keep him as prisoner. Clear political and religious motivations, according to the prosecutor. One message on an encrypted Telegram group stating, "All three of us have complete 100% faith in Allah, so we can't fail." The man who was targeted by this went through an absolutely horrendous ordeal. Itay Kashti described the ordeal as my own personal 7th of October. I was kicked to the head several times, handcuffed to a radiator, forced to lie down on the floor. I was threatened and told if I tried to escape, I'd be killed. The awful attack of the 7th of October was flashing through my mind as I lay restrained on the floor in handcuffs. And actually, I mean, we know that one of the men said, "I know this guy is involved in West Bank settlements, taking Palestinians' land." Absolutely horrendous political, religious motivations here. Let's talk to Jonathan Sacerdoti, who has done a lot to get this story into the public domain and make sure that people are actually talking about it. We're going to talk about it now with Jonathan. Jonathan, it's hard to know where to begin with this because there's such a horrendous cruelty here and clear anti-Semitism.
That's right, Peter, and thank you for covering this story because I, like you, was very shocked that it really hadn't dominated national headlines extensively. Three Muslims in Wales kidnapping a Jewish man because he's Jewish, because they assumed he was rich, because they had some kind of political and religious animosity towards him, and keeping him prisoner, only thanks to his own ability to escape and that of his cab driver who had taken him there unwittingly. He wasn't part of the plot. That's the only reason that they were caught, that perhaps he's even with us today. And so to know that that sort of thing is going on in the United Kingdom, and yet it did have some media coverage, but really very little. It did remind me, actually, of a story from some time ago, which happened in Paris. And that was the story of Ilan Halimi, who was kidnapped in 2006. And he was a Jewish mobile phone salesman kidnapped by a primarily Muslim group then, who called themselves a gang of barbarians. And they believed that Jews are rich, and they kept demanding huge sums of money from his family. And Ilan actually lived with his divorced mum and two sisters. They didn't have anywhere near the nearly €500,000 that was asked then. He was kept hostage for 24 days and eventually was dumped by a roadside, found with 80% burns on his body, signs of torture, and he died on his way to the hospital. Now, that became a big case in France because of the anti-Semitism behind it, and of course because of the horrors of it. It really is only by the grace of God that we're not looking at something similar here today, because Itay Kashti managed to escape. But I would say that, bearing that in mind, the sentencing we have in this country is also really very low. These men got 8 years and 1 month for this crime. In other countries, including the US, you can get 20 years for kidnapping of this type. And the fact that it was racially and religiously aggravated also, in my opinion, should make the sentencing much higher.
Just tell us some of the detail that you've read and heard about this, Jonathan, because, I mean, they rented a remote cottage for a week, stocked it with enough supplies to hold Mr. Kashti until a ransom was paid. These are hateful, horrible people. 8 years doesn't seem like nearly long enough, especially as they probably won't serve all of that.
That's right. Well, I mean, the prosecutor, Craig Jones, said that there was a clear political and religious motivation, and the judge echoed that. In the discussions that went on between those criminals who carried out this kidnapping, they referred to him as having attended pro-Israel marches in London. I don't even know if that's true, but so what if it is? Yeah. One of them said that they knew these guys involved in West Bank settlements taking Palestinians' land. They had this Telegram messaging group that they'd made, in which they said all three of us have complete 100% faith in Allah, so we can't fail. So things like that make it absolutely blindingly clear that this is just one of the more alarming and better known now cases of Muslim anti-Semitism that many Jews in the country are extremely afraid of, in fact around the world, because some degree of hatred towards Jews is actually fundamental to certain people's belief in Islam. You could even say that it can be found in the Quran and in certain other fundamental and central texts to Islam. So there is clearly a problem there that society is very afraid to talk about. And in cases like this, you can see why it's a massive problem, because these Muslim men decided they were inspired by their religion, their God, to kidnap a Jewish man, to tie him up, to try to keep him. I don't know what their intentions were with him. We heard in the case that there was this week of supplies, but no doubt they could have replenished that. I don't really like to think about what could have happened to him, and I'm just very grateful that he was saved, that they were caught, and that they are in jail. But as you said, as I said, I think 8 years is pathetic,
And
especially
this happened
on
on our doorstep. This happened in Wales. Just speaking about the international aspect of this, there's a horrendous story and video from Dublin. The Gardaí the police in Ireland are now properly investigating this. They say based on the video footage that has been there. But this is an Israeli businessman spat at while dining. I'm sure you're aware of this, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Just tell us a bit about this.
Yeah, also another really disgusting video. And the fact is that these things are sadly becoming more and more common. Ireland is a hotbed of anti-Semitism as far as one can tell, and it goes right up to the top politically. We saw even during the Holocaust Memorial Day events not that long ago that they had a Jewish Israeli woman removed from the president's speech because she objected to him talking about the Holocaust and relating it to what was going on in Gaza. Completely inappropriate.
I think, this is from memory, Jonathan, but I think she had a grandparent who went through the Holocaust.
Absolutely. I mean, just the idea that that sort of thing is going on at that level doesn't make it surprising then when we see people, in ordinary society who are being abusive to Jewish or Israeli people like that. To spit at a man in public, to spit at a man having his dinner in a public place, in any context, is actually repulsive and disgusting. To abuse him like that. But because he's Jewish, because he's Israeli, these are really, really worrying times for many Jews. And I'm really not exaggerating when I say that there are so many frequent conversations, not just in Ireland, even here, in London, elsewhere, of Jews wondering how much longer they can stay where they are when society can be extremely hostile towards us. But worse than that, the response time is extremely slow. I mean, there's another quick story, if I've got a moment to tell you about, which is... there's a rabbi called Rabbi Arnie Saunders. You may remember that before the election, he was abused outside a mosque. He lives in England, further north than here, and he had been abused by a group of worshippers at the mosque. He'd been invited to come and speak to them as a candidate in the elections. They've only just now decided to set a court date for that. So that was back during the elections. And that court date is now, I think he told me the other day, in 2 years' time. So bearing in mind that the government and the judiciary and the police can act very swiftly when they see things like what they called anti-Muslim hate going on Facebook and the like during the Southport riots, it seems staggering to Jewish people that there is such a slowness and reluctance to act when things like this are going on, whether it's in Ireland, whether it's in the UK, in England, wherever it is. These things are very serious for Jewish people, but they're very serious for wider society as well, because it really shows a society that has lost its way, lost its moral compass, when we haven't got equal policing, equal judicial attention, equal sentencing, equal time taken to deal with this kind of hatred. And when the people who seem to be left behind are Jews or people who are standing up for the state of Israel, then you can understand why that is deeply worrying.
And actually, back to our original story, two things actually. Back to our original story, I do wonder if 3 Jewish people had kidnapped and assaulted a Muslim.
Would never happen. Never happen.
I think the media coverage would have been slightly different.
I agree with you, but it would never happen because it's not a fundamental part of Judaism to do that to Muslim people. It's not taught or preached anywhere in Jewish text. It's not part of the Jewish tradition. Unfortunately, I don't need to tell you that Islamic-inspired terrorism, torturing, hatred, kidnapping and killing is not rare. All of us have seen it throughout our lives. You don't see the same thing happening from Jews, but you're quite right that if it happened to another minority, carried out by another minority, we would have seen something very different. You can't help but think that that's the case.
Also, Tamir Ohayon from Tel Aviv, the businessman who was spat at, he was visiting Dublin for a business conference. He said nobody intervened during the attack. They chose not to care. He says people just kept eating. I felt helpless and disappointed. I saw faces of people watching me be assaulted. He said he didn't feel safe in Dublin. He locked himself in his hotel room after.
Peter, that's so important because this is the thing. Anyone listening or watching now, we all have a choice in our lives to stand up when we see injustice being carried out to people near us and around us. And even if it doesn't seem to affect us, that's exactly what I hope people will take away from this. If they saw this happening to someone, they should stand up against it. They should stop it happening. And then maybe those thugs would not feel quite so emboldened to be able to do that kind of thing in public.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that. That's Jonathan Sacerdoti there, the journalist and broadcaster.